Okay, I can go first. Hi, I'm Andrea Motsky, and I'm the Lower Willamette Basin Coordinator. And I work with a lot of DMAs in the Portland metro area, all the way up to Wilsonville. And then also I have some new DMAs with this Mercury TMDL in the Multnomah Channel area.
And I'm Priscilla Wolverton. I'm the Basin Coordinator at the other end of the basin from Andrea. So I work with DMAs down in the southern Willamette Valley.
All right, next I'm going to hand it over to Zach Lowboy, who is the Western Region's Watershed Manager, for some opening remarks.
Hello, good morning, everybody. So again, Zach Lowboy, I manage TMDL staff in DEQ's Western region. So Priscilla reports to me. Oftentimes we have another manager on the line. I don't believe he's present this morning. His name is Steve Mrazek. He manages the TMDL staff in DEQ's Northwest region. So Andrea reports to him. And so Steve and I really appreciate your guys' participation in this workshop. This one's specifically geared towards smaller cities that don't have MS4 permits, but do have TMDL requirements to implement stormwater control measures. So welcome, we really appreciate you being here. DEQ will be presenting additional workshops that are geared towards specific TMDL implementation requirements for others like MS4s, counties, and water conveyance entities. So the Willamette's big. It's the most populous basin in the state. There's numerous agencies and jurisdictions. In this Willamette Mercury TMDL, there's actually 172 what we call designated management agencies that will be working towards reducing mercury to Oregon's waterways so that people can safely consume fish and shellfish. Although we know that some DMAs have a greater or lesser impact on mercury reduction, I do know that it's going to take all of us. It's going to take a big group effort to achieve these goals. So timing, it's going to take a lot of years to reduce mercury. So the collective incremental efforts of everybody in reducing runoff and erosion, containing mercury will make a big difference, but over a long time. In fact, although some of the jurisdictions on this call today are smaller, together this group represents about 60 cities across the Willamette Basin, which is not insignificant. So Willamette Basin coordinators, they're going to be working closely with all of you to answer questions you might have as a designated management agency or a DMA. There are guidance documents on our website that can point you in the right direction for developing your TMDL implementation plans and how to report on an annual basis on implementation progress. So all the DMAs have been assigned to a specific basin coordinator. The letter you received from us in March includes the name of the basin coordinator assigned to your jurisdiction. And this is across regional boundaries here at DEQ. Even though all the basin coordinators will be trying to reach out to each of you, each basin coordinator is the point of contact for a bunch of DMAs, a whole number of them. So it's really important that you proactively reach out to your basin coordinator just to make sure that there are clear lines of communication that are established. So the other thing is that the TMDL program is a regulatory program, and DEQ at its heart is a regulatory agency. So DEQ does have enforcement capabilities related to approving TMDL implementation plans and the updates that need to be done every 5 years, and also in receiving timely annual reports that are meant to assess progress towards achieving those 5-year plans. And then in turn, the basin coordinators will ensure that DMAs are aware of the reporting requirements and expectations for successful TMDL implementation plan development. Again, really working collaboratively with you. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Priscilla Wolverton and Andrea Motsky to lead you through the rest of the workshop, which will give you a great overview of stormwater control requirements contained in the Willamette Mercury Water Quality Management Plan that will be specific to your smaller community. So thanks again for attending. We really do appreciate having everybody on the call today. And with that, I'll turn it over to Priscilla. Andrea.
All right, thanks, Zach. This is Andrea Motsky, everyone, and I want to do a quick screen check. Sarah, can you see the slides? Am I sharing correctly? All right, awesome. Okay, so I'm going to start out the presentation and then Priscilla's going to cover the last half of it. What I want to do first is, if I can get this to move forward, is start with a poll, just to get to know our audience a little bit more. So let me see, Sarah, can you pull up that poll? Oh, not that poll, an earlier poll. That one's coming though, it's coming. So we have one that's earlier. There we go, that's the one we want. Thanks, Sarah. So the question, how many participants are familiar with the Mercury TMDL water quality management plan requirements for your city? So in other words, have you had a chance to open up the water quality management plan and take a peek at city requirements? Let's see, it's kind of a race between yes and sort of. All right. Okay, that's pretty much everyone. So kind of a little bit more with sort of, you know, people don't want to admit that they know a lot. I think some of you probably know more than you're admitting to, but sort of kind of came out on top, followed by yes, and then there's 23% no. So that's okay. You know, this presentation's for everyone here. So again, if you guys have any questions during our Q&A session, please ask them. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing these results. Oops, I got to close this. It's too big here. All right. So learning objectives, oops, got to go back. The learning objectives for today. So I am going to go over some of the overall best management practices to reduce sediment and mercury. This presentation's focus is on stormwater management measures, but I also wanted just to touch on some of the strategies that some of the other DMAs are going to be implementing along with the stormwater control measures. I'll also talk about what the load reductions are for this specific sector for non-permitted urban stormwater runoff. Again, stormwater runoff sector that does not have an MS4 permit. And Priscilla then will talk more about those specific 6 stormwater control measures and the deadlines for implementing those control measures, as well as updating the TMDL implementation plans to include those. This slide was shown in last week's presentation, and I wanted to show it again because I think it just gives a nice overview or a little bit of a framework about where Mercury is coming from and what our implementation strategies are going to be. Most of the mercury that is deposited in Oregon is coming from sources outside of Oregon. So they can be national sources, global sources of deposition, air deposition. These can come from coal-fired power plants, incinerators. There's other natural sources such as forest fires, which we're all very well aware of, volcanic eruptions, and just like the mercury that's contained in all sorts of products that we use every day. So most of it's coming in that way. And so our primary implementation strategy for this TMDL is to reduce the amount of sediment and runoff going into Oregon's rivers and streams. So even if it is difficult for us to control those sources coming from outside the state, we're going to do what we can do to reduce the amount of mercury making its way into rivers and streams. There are large reductions to make for mercury for the Willamette Basin TMDL. And as you can see, it's 88 to 96% reductions needed. And that is by subbasins. These are based on the 12 subbasins in the Willamette Basin. So very large reductions to meet, and that's mainly because we have a very protective methylmercury fish tissue criterion here in Oregon, and that was updated in 2011. So because of that update, that standards update in 2011, we needed to revise the TMDL to be able to meet that new methylmercury fish tissue criterion so people can safely eat fish and shellfish caught in Oregon's waters. I wanted to include this slide a bit too, because just in the last slide when I was talking about it's hard to control, at least for the state of Oregon, of mercury emissions coming into the state. But the state of Oregon has done a number of actions to reduce mercury from sources within Oregon itself. The first bullet here, so the last coal-fired power plant, that was the PGE plant in outside of Boardman, that just closed last year, and that was our biggest air emissions of mercury in the state. So that has been closed. And then in 2019, the state of Oregon joined 20 other states in a lawsuit against EPA's decision to ease restrictions on coal-fired power plants. And EPA, in addition, they are a DMA in this TMDL. And so there are expectations for EPA. They have roles in cleanup of Superfund sites that we have, as well as air emissions. And so they're going to help be responsible for some of the national and even global actions related to mercury reductions. The state of us also has had bans and restrictions relating to products containing mercury. Right there, as you see, thermostats, vehicle switches. And then in 2007, the legislature required dental offices to install the dental amalgam separators. And that effort there has greatly reduced the amount of mercury going into wastewater treatment plants. They still do get, they still do have issues with that. But prior to this, taking amalgam out of the waste stream, those are your fillings that have mercury and silver in it. That has made it easier, so to speak. I wouldn't say easy, but it's definitely better getting that mercury out of the waste stream, because otherwise it was transferred to wastewater treatment plant operators, and it's very difficult to get mercury out of the waste stream. And we also have household hazardous waste collection opportunities for people to, bring in their old thermometers for collection, and then it gets disposed of properly. So the next few slides are they're really just a set of photos of different BMPs to reduce mercury. The Oregon Department of Agriculture is a partner of DEQ. They are a DMA for the Willamette Basin, and they will likely be focusing on reducing the percent of bare ground. So this photo here shows filter strips here, and I believe it's in a hazelnut orchard here, to reduce the amount of runoff that could come off, especially when we get all the rains in the winter time. So this is going to be an important strategy for ODA to work with the soil and water conservation districts, as well as landowners and producers. And again, here are also cover crops that can be applied as well to reduce the amount of sediment runoff. Road management strategies will be important for our DMAs that manage forested lands. So for example, the Oregon Department of Forestry, the U.S. Forest Service, the Bureau of Land Management, all manage roads, and roads can definitely be a source of sediment to rivers and streams if they are not managed and maintained properly. In some cases, it's just how you protect, which ones do you prioritize, ones along rivers and streams. In some cases, they may choose to remove or obliterate roads if they're no longer needed. So those are the types of decisions and management objectives that these different agencies will be looking at. Oops, went back. We do have a number of contaminated sites from past mining. So these are photos of acid mine drainage. Mercury was used to extract gold a long time ago, so we still have these sites out here. So we'll be working, DEQ's cleanup program will be working very closely with EPA Superfund program in some cases to clean up these sites. There's a lot of construction going on all around us in the Willamette Basin. Construction site protection is important. DEQ currently does have a stormwater construction permit called the 1200C, and that permit is required for these construction sites that are greater than an acre. For this water quality management plan, we'll be requiring construction site runoff protection for areas less than an acre, and Priscilla will be talking more about that. Some cases we may have to treat stormwater. It can be expensive to treat stormwater. You know, if possible, it's best to infiltrate where you can to reduce the quantity of stormwater coming off impervious surfaces, but in some cases, treatment of stormwater may be required. In green infrastructure, otherwise known as low impact development, I think many people are familiar with this kind of stormwater management strategy that mimics nature. So cases of such as these, where they infiltrate and can treat stormwater, is also management measures that would be important for cities to implement where they can. So with that, I want to go into the stormwater control measure part of the presentation. Before I get into those, though, I do want to there's a note on EPA's disapproval of DEQ's TMDL. DEQ issued their final TMDL at the end of November of 2019, and EPA did disapprove that. And that was because they did not believe that DEQ's TMDL was protective of all the subbasins. And so when EPA then was required to develop their own TMDL, and that was done the following month in December of 2019, EPA's TMDL developed allocations for point sources, or waste load allocations, and then for non-point sources called load allocations. So they developed those in each of the 12 subbasins. So you need to look at EPA's TMDL to find out what those allocations are. Don't look in DEQ's TMDL. There's a lot of good information in DEQ's TMDL about the modeling and the source assessment. Still a lot of good information in there, but look to EPA's TMDL for the actual effective allocations. EPA did state, though, that they are still looking to DEQ's water quality management plan to implement those allocations. So even though EPA has their own set of allocations, they are looking to DEQ's water quality management plan to implement them. So here it is again, effective allocations, look to EPA's TMDL, and for the effective management measures, look to DEQ's water quality management plan. And those are the management measures we're presenting today. The non-point source load allocations for the non-permitted stormwater sector is 75% total mercury reductions. The only exception is the middle Willamette, which is higher at 97% reductions. Otherwise, the other 11 subbasins are 75% total mercury reductions requirement. These are aggregated allocations. And so what that means is that not each city has to meet that 75% reduction. Instead, the cities together through collective strategic management measures, implementing those management measures, must meet that 75% reduction. A few notes on mercury in stormwater. We had a Mercury TMDL in place back in 2006. And at that time, large communities, some of the large cities that have MS4 phase 1 permits were required to collect mercury and stormwater. And that was for DEQ to get a sense of what the levels of concentration of mercury were in stormwater. And out of many samples, the median value of total mercury was 4.62 nanograms per liter. So that's a really small number. That's in parts per trillion. So even though it's small, our TMDL water column target is 0.14 nanograms per liter. Very, very small amounts here. So even if it is small, the 4.62 is environmentally relevant. So that is why we're focusing on stormwater management. The model also indicated that mercury found in urban runoff was from atmospheric deposition. As I said in the very beginning, most of it's coming from atmospheric deposition. That's the same case with cities. So there's not like there's a specific mercury sources in big cities that we're focusing on. It's just simply the more impervious area you have, rooftops, parking lots, sidewalks, streets, the more that's going to run off generally. And so that's really, again, what we're focusing on. It's not a big city, little city. It's simply impervious area. And that is why we also concluded that mercury is also present in smaller urban areas, and they need to contribute to mercury reductions. The good news is that since the 2006 Mercury TMDL, DMAs have been implementing mercury reduction efforts. I won't go through all of these, but looking at sediment and erosion control plans for new and redevelopment. So some cities have already been doing this. Some have been making use of LID practices. Another important one is conservation and enhancement of riparian buffers. So many of the DMAs that are on the call today are also DMAs for the temperature TMDL. And so as part of the temperature TMDL, you've been doing a lot of work around ordinances around riparian protection, in-water work, stream, tree planting in riparian areas. So that's all doing double duty here, so to speak. It's both helping to reduce temperature, but it's also providing buffers to reduce the amount of sediment going into rivers and streams. So some of your actions are already contributing towards mercury reduction. Every 5 years, DEQ works with the DMAs to do 5-year reviews, and that's looking back at the last 4 years of implementation and collecting a bunch of implementation efforts from all the DMAs. The last one we did was in 2018, and as part of that survey that we did, we had some questions in there about what stormwater control measures DMAs were implementing. And so when you look at that information, and I focused on the less than 10,000 population for DMAs, and we see that 23% have an illicit discharge and detection program. 51% had some kind of pollution prevention and good housekeeping. 65% had an erosion and sediment control plan in place from construction activities. 35% had some post-construction stormwater control, and 61% had some kind of public outreach and education. These were self-reported, and I think in some cases DMAs underreported because they thought their programs had to be like this big, standalone program, so to speak, when some of these different control measures they've been doing all along. So the point of this slide is just to say that although these requirements are coming as part of the TMDL, there's been a number of DMAs who've kind of been out ahead and are already putting in some of these practices. So these are the 6 stormwater control measures. And Priscilla, again, will be talking more in depth about these. But these come from EPA's regulations on in 1998 at the MS4 Phase 2 permit, where they recommended at a minimum these 6 stormwater control measures to be implemented in many cities across the country. When we were looking as part of this water quality management plan, we also wanted to look to these 6 control measures as well. And that was for a couple of reasons. One was these 6 stormwater control measures were required for larger DMAs greater than 10,000 of population in the 2006 Mercury TMDL. So we were already requiring these 6 stormwater control measures. And also we wanted to maintain consistency with our MS4 program and the TMDL program. So we're continuing to look at these 6 stormwater control measures. They're a little different than the Phase 2 permits. They're not as prescriptive and they don't have as many elements associated with each one of these 6 stormwater control measures. But we are leaning heavily on these requirements. Applicability. So if you're a city with a population of 5,000 people or greater, and that's 19 communities in the Willamette Basin, you must implement these 6 stormwater control measures. If you have less than 5,000, and that's 41 communities, so that's a big chunk of the cities within the Willamette Basin, it's not required to implement all 6 stormwater control measures, but you must evaluate whether you can implement some or not all of the 6 minimum control measures. So as part of that, when you are working with your basin coordinator, we're going to expect to see at least some of these 6 stormwater control measures being implemented or will be implemented over the years. You need to let us know the kind of challenges or any kind of specific limitations you may have if you're not able to do that. And in some cases, for example, if cities exceed that 5,000 population limit, we may require you then at that point to implement the 6 stormwater control measures. So Priscilla's going to be talking about the deadlines for those, but just remember, if you're less than 5,000, some of these you might be able to implement sooner than others. You can have time to implement some of these. And the last slide that I'm going to cover before we pause for questions, these are the 19 communities that are required to implement the 6 stormwater control measures. I've split them up between those communities that are greater than 10,000 and communities that are between 5,000 and 10,000. And the only reason why I did that is because your implementation deadlines are different if you're smaller than if you're greater than 10,000. So that's the applicability, and I want to pause here for questions before we move on to see if anyone has any questions about what I covered so far. Again, Priscilla's going to cover more of the specifics related to each of those 6 stormwater control measures and the implementation plan requirements and some deadlines. But if you have any questions for me, please ask away.
Andrea, we have one question.
Yeah.
It used to be that regulatory languages associated with the Department of Agriculture were not mandatory. Is that still the case?
Are they thinking about having to develop an implementation plan? Maybe is that that might be what they're referring to. So ODA and Oregon Department of Agriculture and Oregon Department of Forestry, in our OIRs, they have jurisdiction for water quality. And so they do not develop TMDL implementation plans, but ODA does have, they develop these area plans to meet TMDL requirements.
I might ask Elizabeth, who asked the question,
Oh, okay.
to follow
Hey,
up and see if
Elizabeth.
she has any clarification.
Hi, Andrea. So it just used to be that the regulatory language kind of held the feet to the fire of like the Department of Ag and Department of Forestry. So this wasn't really do they have to do a TMDL implementation plan, but it was more of a you should do this, but you don't have to do it. And I'm just wondering if that's as far as BMPs go.
Right. And we generally do leave it up to the DMA to figure out which management strategies will be most effective. In the water quality management plan, and we're actually working with ODA right now on those management strategies. So there are some discussions to be had, but in the water quality management plan, they had identified reducing percent bare ground. So we are working with them a bit on this, but it might vary across the subbasin in terms of the types of strategies that they'll be working with, their SWCD partners and landowners on which BMPs may be most effective in their areas.
Great, thank you.
Sure, Elizabeth.
All right, I've got a couple more questions here. We are below 5,000, but could very well hit that number in the next year or two. What recommendations do you have?
I would probably talk with your basin coordinator about that. If we would probably wait, so our population information that we used was based on Portland State University. So they come out every year with a population estimate. And that's the one we used because we were waiting for the 2020 census to come out, and we need to get the TMDL prior to the 2020 census, and even that we knew it was going to take a while there. So we would likely, I think we need to talk about it a little bit more, but we still might rely on PSU's census as opposed to a US census. But if you're getting to that point where you're just right at that cutoff around 5,000, I would just have discussions with your basin coordinator and start kind of thinking ahead a little bit. Starting off first with what you can do. And then the ones that might be more difficult to implement, that might be a little farther out. You have some time to get that implemented. So I would just encourage you to reach out to the basin coordinator.
All right. Do counties also have TMDL plans and requirements?
They do, and that's in 2 workshops from now. So if counties definitely, they have TMDL specific requirements as well. And we'll be going over those in it's the two workshops from now.
All right. And then last question. Is there a schedule for the next phase of MS4 permitting?
When the next 4, for the phase 4, for the MS4 permits? What was that again? I'm sorry.
Let's see here, Larry, feel free to unmute yourself and add some clarity. The question is there a schedule for the next phase of MS4 permitting?
Well, I know with the phase 1s, our MS4 staff are currently working on the reissuance of the phase 1s and to incorporate Mercury requirements in that phase 1 permit. Phase 2 every 5 years, right? So when's the next one due in 3 years. I'm trying to remember where we are when the next phase 2 permit. Someone
Yeah, I
can
think
help
we're
me out.
about 3 years out.
About 3 years out. Okay.
All right,
I
thanks,
guess
Andrea.
I was more curious on if I'm with the city of McMinnville and if there's if we will be included in an upcoming MS4 permitting phase.
So you're not a phase 2 right now, is what you're saying?
That's correct.
Okay. Yeah, I would reach out to our we can get you in contact with our MS4 stormwater staff. You know, there's certain, like, you know, urban density requirements in terms of, and some other criteria that you could be included in a phase 2 permit, but I would defer those to our stormwater staff.
All right, thanks, Andrea. That's all the questions for now. So I just want to remind everyone that we will have another opportunity to ask questions at the end of the presentations.
All right, so I am going to go through, this is Priscilla Wolverton speaking, and I'm going to go through the specific stormwater management requirements outlined in the revised Mercury TMDL water quality management plan. So in terms of implementation, one of the biggest differences between the 2019 water quality management plan and the 2006 water quality management plan is that the 2019 plan is more prescriptive about the types of things that DMAs have to implement under each of the 6 stormwater control measures. So the information addressed in the next few slides, you can find in table 1311 of the 2019 water quality management plan. So pollution prevention and good housekeeping is a strategy or program that a lot of you are already implementing. And so Andrea shared some numbers just a few minutes ago, and we saw that more than half of you were already implementing strategies that fall under this category. And these things that you're doing include cleaning and repairing your stormwater system, responding to spills, providing employee training, using integrated pest management. And there's a number of other types of activities that you do that are actually inherent parts of standard operating practices for a lot of cities. But even though you may be doing these things, you may not be tracking it. And so I want to just remind everyone that the TMDL annual report requires a descriptive summary of activities. So you should be able to report out every year to DEQ on the the relevant employee training that you've provided, how you responded to spills and other discharges, system improvements, and any other best management practices that you're employing to show implementation of the stormwater measure. So another strategy that you saw in Andrea's slide that a number of DMAs are already engaged in, it was over 60%, is outreach and education. And outreach and education is one of the more difficult strategies to assess against progress, yet it's one of the most important for implementation over time. And that's because changing people's behaviors takes time, and it also takes consistent messaging. So maintaining outreach is important to getting your community and your leadership on board with water quality protection and improvement. The 2019 Water Quality Management Plan includes a requirement to qualitatively evaluate at least one education and outreach activity each year. So this is something unique from the last Water Quality Management Plan in 2006. This requirement is new this time around. Examples of different tools include using surveys to gauge changes in community members' knowledge before and after an outreach effort or event, assessing changes and reported violations after targeted outreach is conducted, or tracking changes in community use of advertised services. So a lot of different ways to perform this type of assessment. And the goal here, though, is to find a way that helps provide feedback about which outreach and education techniques are better at getting the desired results in your community. A number of our DMAs use newsletters and bill inserts, social media platforms, storm drain markings. They do specific outreach in schools and community centers. There's a lot of different types of ways to perform this outreach and education. I think what'll be more challenging moving forward, though, is doing that assessment to determine which of those ways are benefiting your efforts the most. So public involvement is similar to, but a little different from outreach and education. Public involvement includes opportunities for your community members to actively participate in protecting water quality. So this includes providing a way for the public to provide feedback and help inform the development of local rules and standards that impact stormwater and stormwater water quality. Maintaining a website is important. You need to have a place where people can find out who to call if they want to report a water quality concern or a violation. It also allows access to information that helps your community members make good decisions for their watershed. These days, I think most of us know that a lot of our community members use the internet as a first stop for finding answers to questions they have. So we think it's important that you provide and maintain online access for keeping your communities informed, maintaining online access for your community members to help keep them informed about your efforts to protect water quality and things they can do to support that effort. So illicit discharge detection and elimination is a control measure that's about implementing and enforcing a program to detect and eliminate illicit discharges into your stormwater conveyance system. An illicit discharge is any discharge to a stormwater conveyance system that is not composed entirely of stormwater. The 2019 Water Quality Management Plan specifies that an ordinance or other regulatory mechanism must define the range of illicit discharges it covers, including discharges that are conditionally allowed, such as groundwater and lawn watering discharges. I know I work with a number of DMAs that rely on a nuisance code to implement an IDDE program. And in a lot of cases, that nuisance code suffices and meets the needs. But I think for some of you, you may have to revisit that code and make sure that it meets those definitions in Table 1311. So this water quality management plan also requires DMAs to maintain a map of the stormwater system and have a procedure in place to document complaints or reports about illicit discharges. So a majority of DMAs reported in the 2018 Willamette Basin 5-year review that they had procedures in place for responding to illicit discharges. Far fewer actually reported having a tracking system in place. So that's another effort that will be an uplift for some of you that may have procedures and staff training and techniques for responding to illicit discharges, but may not be tracking and documenting how and when these are occurring. So construction site runoff. This is one you saw from Andrea's slide where we do have a number of DMAs that are implementing erosion and sediment control strategies and actions. And what's unique or different in this water quality management plan from the previous one was that construction projects that disturb 1 or more acres, for these, the DMA must refer project sites to DEQ or the appropriate DEQ agent to make sure that they obtain the NPDES construction stormwater permit or 1200C permit that they should have. I know a number of you already do this, but we've made it an explicit requirement in the 2019 Water Quality Management Plan. There are, however, relatively fewer large construction sites of 1 acre or more in many of our cities that are experiencing development. You know, many construction sites are smaller. So the 2019 Water Quality Management Plan includes DMAs to require construction site operators to complete and implement an erosion and sediment control plan for project sites in its jurisdictional area that result in a minimum land disturbance of 1 acre, or excuse me, 1/2 acre or more. So these erosion, sediment, and waste materials management controls must be implemented from initial clearing through the end of project and site stabilization. And after site stabilization comes post-construction site runoff. The 2019 Water Quality Management Plan requires DMAs to regulate post-construction runoff management for project sites that create or replace 1/4 acre of impervious surface or more. Stormwater controls must target pre-development runoff rates and volumes and target 80% removal of total suspended solids. There are many different types of stormwater controls that can be used to meet these targets, including structural controls like storage practices, wet ponds, detention outlet structures, or filtration practices that employ grassed swales, sand filters, and filter strips, and infiltration practices like infiltration basins and infiltration trenches. There are also non-structural stormwater controls. You can use development standards and other regulatory mechanisms to minimize and treat stormwater before it runs off-site. But ideally, you're managing to keep and infiltrate as much stormwater on site as possible. Something else that this water quality management plan specifically points to are long-term operation and maintenance requirements. So with all of these different types of stormwater controls that developers can use, it's important that they're maintained properly. And so we think it's important that your city have the authority to require the maintenance of these controls over time. Measurable objectives. So for each of these 6 stormwater measures and the specific requirements related to each of them, in your implementation plan, we want to see measurable objectives. This is something, again, that a lot of you already clearly identify in your plan, but not everyone is there yet. So we're going to be looking for this time around very closely, that your strategies include a method to track progress and document challenges. So you need to be able to measure whether or not you're gaining ground on successfully and fully implementing stormwater strategies and the specific actions under those strategies or stormwater measures. Your strategies also have to include interim timelines to measure progress against. So you need to be able to track whether or not you're meeting your targets. And if you're not, remember, you can always use adaptive management to find a different or better fit for your community. So adaptive management continues to be an important part of TMDL implementation. It was in the 2006 Water Quality Management Plan, and it is an important component of the 2019 Water Quality Management Plan. So implementation schedule. Andrea mentioned that we had identified specific timelines associated with each of these control measures and the specific requirements under each of them, and that those timelines are a little different depending on the population size of your jurisdiction. We recognize, DEQ recognizes the financial challenges that multiple cities face in implementing the Willamette Basin TMDLs. in addition to providing the needed services of your community. So DEQ is not anticipating that you are able to fully implement all of these things within the next 18 months. Your implementation plan is on an 18-month timeline, but fully implementing the things in your plan are dictated by the timeline that you see here. Based on DMA feedback from the Willamette 5-year review and the public comment period during TMDL development, we expect that illicit discharge detection and elimination, construction site runoff control, and post-construction site runoff for new development and redevelopment will likely take a little longer than some of the other measures. And you see that reflected here. This table you can find in the Water Quality Management Plan. It's table 1314. And these are some resources that we shared on last week's call as well. So we just want to plug them again. Your basin coordinator is a resource to you. Definitely reach out to your basin coordinator, but please also check out these other resources and materials we have available online. There's a lot of good information in here, and it can help get you started in planning implementation of those 6 stormwater measures from the Water Quality Management Plan. And now we're just gonna take a poll really quick, and Sarah's gonna help us out here with that. We know that your city is already implementing a number of stormwater measures. Offhand, how many are you implementing currently? Okay, so jumping around a little here. Looks like we've got just about everyone's response now. So the majority of you are implementing 3 to 4, so at least half of the measures. About a quarter of you are implementing 5 to 6, so that's great. But what it looks like is that for most of you, you probably have another 2 to 3 of these stormwater measures that you may be embarking on as a new effort here over the next 5 to 10 years. And I want to do one more poll real quickly here. So your city, excuse me, what following stormwater strategies will be most difficult to implement? And when the poll goes up, there it is. I'm going to ask that you select all that apply. What following strategies do you anticipate being the most difficult for your jurisdiction to implement? Okay. So this is pretty consistent with the feedback we got in the 5-year review and the public comment period during TMDL development. Looks like those who are going to participate probably have, so we're going to end the poll here. And illicit discharge detection and elimination, and public involvement and participation. So not surprised to see IDDE as being one you see as potentially difficult. I'm a little surprised at public involvement and participation. I know that's one that a number are already implementing, but it's good to get that feedback, and we'll keep that in mind moving forward. So thank you for participating in those polls. Okay. There we go. Took me a few clicks. So don't want to bring the party energy down here, but I do just want to remind everyone that Zach mentioned on the onset of the meeting that we are a regulatory program, and there are enforcement actions associated with failing to timely submit or implement a total maximum daily load plan. There's also enforcement related to not submitting your annual reports or your updated implementation plans on time. So just keep in mind that we have a process of escalating enforcement, and we start by sending warning letters. And that warning letter is a heads up that, hey, you missed your due date, or you didn't implement these things on the timeline you said you would. And so if you get that warning letter, it's a notice that the next year we expect an on-time report, and we expect you to report progress on implementing the strategies in your plan. I wanted to share this timeline again with you, just to make sure everyone is well aware of it and keeps it on your radar. You all received a letter in March of 2021 letting you know that you are identified as a DMA or responsible person in the Mercury TMDL. And the date on that letter started the clock on an 18-month time frame for you to work within your jurisdiction, as well as work with your basin coordinator to submit an implementation plan and any other required documentation to support the information in that plan. So September 3rd, 2022, that is the date that your plan must be submitted by. We do not expect to get half-written plans or draft plans on September 3rd. If you are not sure about the contents of your plan, reach out to your basin coordinator. We're happy to take a look at those prior to September 3rd and point out any glaring gaps or things that you haven't accounted for. So take advantage of that opportunity to work with your basin coordinator so that in September you can submit, if not an approvable plan, an almost approvable plan. And we've got some more upcoming workshops. Someone asked about the county workshop earlier. Looks like that's going to be on June 1st. So just a few weeks out. The next one, we are not having a workshop on the 18th. So we're skipping a week, but we're going to pick back up on the 25th. And we'll be back on schedule to host a session every Tuesday then for the next few weeks. And if you are here today, but you also represent a permitted MS4 or a county or a water conveyance entity, strongly encourage you to attend the workshop that's relevant to you because the requirements for those entities are a little different than the ones we went over today. So I want to make sure you get all of the information. And this is a list of Willamette Basin coordinators. So if you're on this call today because you received a letter that you are a DMA and you don't know who your basin coordinator is, it is in that letter that you received, the name and contact information for your basin coordinator. Feel free though, if you don't have that letter, you lost that letter, not sure where it is, you can always shoot one of us an email. We can help you figure it out. But you can also next week access this presentation online as well and just pull up this slide and find who your contact is. Really want to encourage you to be proactive about reaching out to your basin coordinator. If you have not heard from us yet, the ball's in your court. You need to reach out and make sure you understand next steps for updating your plan or developing a plan if you are new to this process. And with that, we will stop and take any additional questions that you have. I'm just pulling up the chat feature here.
There's a couple comments, but I'm not seeing any questions.
Oh, no questions. Okay. Okay, comment about source tracking. That can be challenging. I think a number of you, I recognize a lot of names on this on this webinar, and I know a few years ago we had an IDDE workshop in Salem, and I think those materials are available on our website, and a couple of the DMAs gave excellent presentations on how they approach source tracking. So that is something that we can keep in mind for a future workshop as well, kind of focus on that element of IDDE. And maybe a joke, not sure. But yeah, you can plead the fifth on the poll questions if you want. And, just want to emphasize that I think most basin coordinators, we prefer not to go to enforcement. Really, our preference is that we learn early and often and about what's going on in your community, and that you are using adaptive management to address any gaps or challenges in implementation that you're experiencing.
All right, we do have a question, Priscilla. Does the Mercury TMDL plan need to be separate from our existing TMDL plan, or can the existing one be updated?
You can definitely update your existing plan. That is the preferred method, to have one plan. And this time around, you will just need to update those strategies that are specific to Mercury. For a lot of you, though, in your plan, these strategies, stormwater strategies, apply both to bacteria and Mercury. And so depending on how you have your implementation plan organized, you may find that you're updating a section that applies to both bacteria and Mercury. So that is potential change that you could be making there. But yeah, incorporate these updates into your existing plan. And if you have questions about how to do that, just reach out to your basin coordinator and we'll walk you through that. So I don't know if we have a shy group or an incredibly well-informed group. I'd like to think we have a really well-informed group. A lot of folks on the call today, you've been implementing for 20 or more years. And so you're probably in really good shape to take next steps on updating your plan.
All right, we do have another question.
Okay.
Two, actually. Have any of the 5,000 to 10,000 population DMAs already put together plans that we can see as an example?
You can ask your basin coordinator for an example from another city. If you're interested in that, we can definitely accommodate that. I don't know of any, though, as of today, that have updated their plan to reflect the new Mercury TMDL requirements. So you can see an example of an implementation plan that already exists, but it's probably not going to have all of those things in table 1311 of the water quality management plan.
All right, another question. Did I miss the deadline for a revised TMDL plan?
No. Who's that? Who's that?
Let's see here.
It's me. It's Amanda Ferguson.
Oh, hey, Amanda. You're good, girl. You're good. You didn't miss the deadline.
I'm like, did I miss it already?
No. You still have plenty of time.
So Priscilla, that plan is actually due like 15 months from now?
Yeah. A little over a year. September 3rd,
September 3rd.
2022. Yep. So you got it feels like plenty of time, but if you want your basin coordinator to have an opportunity to look at a draft or provide some feedback prior to September 3rd, I would really encourage you guys getting those questions into your basin coordinator, by like this fall at the latest, because we're working with a lot of you and there's a turnaround time when we get questions and are asked to look at draft materials. So if you want that feedback prior to September 3rd, definitely, send us that information. I would recommend by this fall. Yeah.
Do we need to collect data about current mercury levels so we can show that we're reducing it?
You don't. You do not. You are required to continue to track best management practice implementation. So what are the planning and what are the planning and on the ground actions that you are doing to meet your non-point source allocation? The water quality monitoring part of that is not something that you are required to participate in. However, we do have a monitoring strategy that outlines a broad framework for DEQ moving forward in our goals for monitoring in the watershed. And it does include pulling in designated management agencies if and when we can. But that is not going to be a requirement for the group of folks represented on the phone today.
Thank you. All right, I want to remind folks on the phone that you are welcome to email me your questions, or you can hit *9 to raise your hand. I'll just glance through one more time to see if anybody's raising their hands. I'm not seeing any. And I don't see any emails.
Okay. Well, if something comes up later when you pull out your plan and start to look at it, again, don't hesitate to reach out to your basin coordinator. We are here and available to make sure that you can successfully submit all of your required documents by September 3rd. All right. Well, with that, we might go ahead and close the meeting. Really appreciate all of you joining us on the call today. It's good to see the level of engagement that we're getting in these sessions. It makes me feel confident that most of you, if not all of you, will be submitting your updated implementation plan on time.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
all.
Yep.
Bye,
thank you.
everyone.